sometimes the most expensive thing a good man ever gives away isn't his money. It's the future he was trying to protect. Ethan Brooks never imagined those words would become the quiet truth of his own life. 24 hours before everything changed, he was simply another hardworking single father trying to survive one more shift beneath the bright fluorescent lights of Ridgeway Market on the edge of Columbus, Ohio. But this story doesn't begin with kindness. It begins with a crowd. It begins with voices. It begins with a security guard gripping Ethan's arm, while customers lifted their phones, eager to record another stranger's worst day. Company policy is company policy. The store manager snapped loud enough for everyone to hear. You abandoned your station. You're fired. Ethan didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't even try to explain that the woman lying unconscious outside had stopped breathing normally for several terrifying seconds. Instead, he looked down at the paper grocery bags still resting near the checkout lane, filled with cereal, peanut butter, milk, and the strawberry yogurt his 8-year-old daughter Lily always asked for after school. He quietly picked it up. "Dad," Lily whispered from beside the automatic doors, clutching the sleeve of her faded blue hoodie. Her eyes searched his face, not for answers, but for reassurance. Ethan forced the smallest smile he could manage. "It's okay, sweetheart." But it wasn't okay. Around them, whispers drifted through the entrance like cold wind. He lost his job over a stranger. Can you believe that? Who throws everything away for someone they don't even know? Ethan heard every word. He answered none of them, because dignity rarely argues with noise. Outside, gray autumn clouds hung low across the Ohio sky, while a cool October breeze carried the scent of rain across the parking lot. The ambulance had already disappeared. The woman he had carried to safety was gone. He didn't know her name. He didn't know where she had come from. All he remembered was seeing a pregnant woman stumble beside the shopping carts before collapsing onto the pavement, while dozens of hurried shoppers looked away, afraid of being late, afraid of becoming involved, afraid that helping might cost them something. Ethan had never been afraid of that, maybe because life had already taken almost everything from him. His wife, his savings, the dreams he once carried before becoming both father and mother to one little girl who still believed her dad could fix almost anything. He looked at Lily, brushing a loose strand of blonde hair behind her ear. "Let's go home." She nodded without asking questions. Children often understand love long before they understand sacrifice. As they walked toward his 12-year-old pickup truck, neither of them noticed the black luxury SUV parked across the street. Inside, a silver-haired executive lowered his phone after ending an urgent call. His eyes never left Ethan Brooks. "We found him," he said quietly. "She's going to want to meet this man herself." Across the city, inside a private hospital suite guarded by silence instead of security, the woman whose life Ethan had saved slowly opened her eyes, placed one trembling hand over her unborn child, and whispered the first question that would quietly change all three of their lives forever. "Where's the man who gave up everything for someone he didn't even know?" The little pickup truck rumbled through the quiet streets of Columbus just as the last traces of daylight disappeared behind rows of maple trees painted in deep shades of orange and gold. Ethan Brooks kept both hands on the steering wheel, his eyes fixed on the road ahead, although his thoughts drifted somewhere far beyond the windshield. Beside him, Lily hugged the grocery bag on her lap, as though protecting the simple treasures inside. Neither of them spoke for several miles. Silence had become their way of carrying burdens together. Their small rented duplex stood at the end of a narrow street, where children still left bicycles on front lawns and neighbors waved from weathered porches. The white paint had begun to peel, and the front steps creaked with every footstep, but to Lily it was still home because her father was there. Ethan unlocked the front door, placed the groceries on the kitchen counter, and quietly hung his worn work jacket beside the entrance. The empty hook where his employee badge usually rested caught his attention for only a second before he looked away. Lily climbed onto one of the kitchen stools. "Are we going to be all right?" she asked softly. Ethan opened the refrigerator, carefully placing the milk inside before answering. "We always find a way." She watched him with the remarkable seriousness only children who have faced too much too early seem to possess. Because Mom used to say that. Ethan smiled gently. Yes, your mom believed that good people do not stop being good just because life becomes difficult. Lily nodded as if storing those words somewhere safe inside her heart. Later that evening, after grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup warmed the little kitchen with familiar comfort, Ethan sat alone at the dining table while Lily finished her homework nearby. A stack of unpaid utility bills rested beneath an old family photograph. His eyes lingered on the picture of his late wife, Hannah, laughing beside Lake Erie during happier summers when the future had still felt predictable. He reached into the drawer and pulled out a notebook where every monthly expense had been carefully written in neat handwriting. Rent, electricity, car insurance, school supplies. The final paycheck he would never receive had already been counted long before it disappeared. He quietly crossed out the expected income with a pencil. The numbers no longer worked. Still, he refused to let Lily see the worry settling across his face. Upstairs, rain began tapping softly against the windows, filling the house with a peaceful rhythm that almost disguised the uncertainty waiting for morning. Across town, the atmosphere could not have been more different. Inside the top floor of Hayes Global Medical Center, warm lighting reflected across polished hardwood floors and oversized windows overlooking the city skyline. Victoria Hayes slowly opened the leather folder resting on her hospital bed. Her physician smiled with relief after another examination confirmed that both mother and baby were healthy. But Victoria barely heard him. She could only think about the stranger whose steady arms had carried her through chaos without asking for anything in return. Did anyone identify him? She asked quietly. Her longtime chief of staff, Daniel Mercer, glanced toward his tablet. We are still reviewing security footage from the store and nearby businesses. Victoria lowered her hand onto her stomach, feeling the gentle movement of the child growing inside her. Find him, she whispered. Not because I owe him something, because people like him are becoming too rare. Daniel gave a respectful nod before stepping into the hallway to make another call. As hospital staff quietly moved through the corridors, one truth had already begun changing lives without anyone fully realizing it. Ethan believed he had lost everything by choosing compassion over convenience. Victoria was beginning to understand that she had just discovered the one quality money had never been able to buy. The following Monday morning arrived with the quiet determination that often follows a difficult weekend. Ethan Brooks stood in front of the bathroom mirror adjusting the only navy blue button-down shirt he owned, smoothing wrinkles with his hands because he could not afford professional pressing. The tie hanging around his neck had belonged to his father, and although it had faded with time, he still wore it whenever he wanted to remind himself that character was something a man carried long before success ever found him. Downstairs, Lily packed her own lunch into a small purple backpack. She slipped an extra apple into the side pocket before looking toward the stairs. For you, she called with a gentle smile. Ethan laughed softly as he walked into the kitchen. I thought that was your favorite. She shrugged. You always tell me heroes need energy. He knelt beside her and accepted the apple as though she had handed him something priceless. Thank you, sweetheart. She wrapped her arms around his neck. Someone is going to hire you. Ethan wished confidence came as naturally as it did to children. Instead of answering immediately, he simply kissed the top of her head. I hope they do. An hour later, he had already submitted applications to 3 grocery stores, 2 hardware stores, and a local warehouse. Every conversation followed the same pattern. The hiring managers smiled politely until they noticed he had been terminated from his previous employer only days earlier. Their expressions changed almost instantly. We will keep your application on file. We are looking for someone with a different background. We will call if something opens. They never promised more than that. By noon, Ethan sat alone on a wooden bench outside a neighborhood park, holding a paper cup of coffee that had already grown cold. Children laughed from nearby swings while autumn leaves drifted across the walking path. For a brief moment, he closed his eyes, reminding himself that disappointment was temporary if hope remained alive. Across the city, inside the headquarters of Hayes Global Retail, The atmosphere moved with quiet precision. Glass walls reflected the morning sunlight while executives hurried between meetings carrying reports worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Victoria Hayes stepped into the executive conference room, wearing a simple cream-colored dress instead of the designer suits she usually preferred. She was still recovering, but nothing could persuade her to postpone this investigation. Daniel Mercer connected the security footage from Ridgeway Market onto the large presentation screen. The room became silent. There was Victoria collapsing beside the shopping carts. There were dozens of shoppers stepping around her. There was a manager shouting for cashiers to stay at their registers because the weekend rush mattered more than anything else. Then Ethan appeared. He never looked toward the cameras. He never hesitated. He removed his own jacket, gently supported Victoria, spoke calmly to emergency responders, and remained beside her until the ambulance doors closed. The recording continued. Minutes later, the manager pointed toward the exit with unmistakable frustration. Ethan quietly accepted his dismissal without arguing. Victoria watched every second without interrupting. When the screen finally turned black, no one around the table spoke. Daniel broke the silence first. His name is Ethan Brooks, 39 years old, widower, one daughter, former assistant store manager. Excellent employment record until this incident. Victoria folded her hands together. He lost his job because he chose compassion. Daniel nodded once. That appears to be exactly what happened. Victoria looked through the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city below. Thousands of people were beginning another ordinary day, each carrying struggles invisible to everyone else. Somewhere among them walked a man who believed kindness had cost him everything. A gentle smile touched her face, not because she pitied him, but because she had finally found someone whose values could not be purchased, persuaded, or frightened away. "Do not contact him yet," she said quietly. "I want to meet Ethan Brooks before he ever learns who I really am." Some truths are only visible when no one knows they are being tested. 3 days passed without a single job offer. Yet Ethan Brooks refused to let disappointment become the example his daughter remembered. Every morning he walked Lily to school before searching for work across Columbus. And every evening he returned home with the same gentle smile, even when the weight in his shoulders betrayed how exhausted he truly felt. On Thursday afternoon, as golden sunlight stretched across the sidewalks and a cool breeze carried the scent of fresh coffee through the downtown streets, Ethan noticed an older woman struggling beside a compact sedan parked outside a neighborhood bakery. One of the front tires had gone flat, and several shopping bags rested awkwardly on the curb. Without waiting to be asked, he set down the folder of job applications he had been carrying. "Would you like a hand?" he asked with the same calm sincerity that had always come naturally to him. The woman looked relieved. "I was beginning to think I would be here all afternoon." Ethan smiled softly. "It will only take a few minutes." Unknown to him, a dark gray SUV sat across the street. Inside, Victoria Hayes watched quietly through the passenger window, while Daniel Mercer sat beside the driver pretending to read emails. Victoria had insisted that no one interfere. She wanted to see the man exactly as he lived when. He believed no one important was watching. Ethan carefully changed the tire, wiped his hands on an old shop towel he still carried in his truck, and politely declined the $50 bill the grateful woman offered. "Please keep it," he said. "You might need it more than I do today." The woman looked surprised. "Young man, I have lived long enough to know when someone needs the money." Ethan chuckled gently. "Then you probably also know that helping someone should not always come with a price." Victoria lowered her eyes for a moment. She had negotiated billion-dollar acquisitions, addressed international investors, and stood before thousands of employees without hesitation. Yet watching a man quietly refuse money he desperately needed unsettled something deep inside her. The following afternoon, she decided to meet him herself. She dressed simply in blue jeans, a light sweater, and comfortable walking shoes, leaving behind every symbol that revealed who she really was. Her security team protested, but she ignored them. She drove an ordinary sedan borrowed from the company motor pool and parked outside the small community center where Ethan had volunteered years before. According to Daniel's research, Ethan still visited every Friday to repair broken furniture and shelves without accepting payment. Victoria stepped inside, carrying a small wooden rocking chair with one loose leg. Ethan was kneeling beside an elderly veteran's walker, tightening several bolts with patient concentration. He looked up and smiled politely. "Good afternoon. What can I help you with?" Victoria placed the chair beside him. "I heard someone here knows how to fix almost anything." Ethan examined the chair carefully before looking back at her. "Someone exaggerated a little, but I can certainly try." She watched his hands work with quiet confidence. Every movement was careful, deliberate, respectful toward an object most people would have thrown away. "What do I owe you?" she asked after he finished. Ethan gently tested the chair until it no longer wobbled. "Nothing." Victoria frowned slightly. "At least let me buy you dinner." Ethan shook his head with a warm smile. "Thank you, but my daughter is waiting for me at home. Friday nights belong to her." For just a heartbeat, neither of them spoke. Sunlight poured through the center's old windows, dust floating quietly in the golden beams while children laughed somewhere down the hallway. Victoria realized she had spent years measuring people by performance reports, quarterly earnings, and polished presentations. Standing before her now was a man whose greatest achievements would never appear on any balance sheet. As Ethan carried the repaired rocking chair toward her car, he had no idea that the woman thanking him with grateful eyes owned the very company whose decisions would soon change his life forever. Saturday morning arrived wrapped in crisp autumn air and clear blue skies, the kind of morning that made Columbus feel smaller and kinder than it really was. Ethan Brooks and Lily wandered through the neighborhood farmer's market, carrying a reusable canvas bag that had been patched more than once but remained perfectly useful. Lily skipped ahead from booth to booth, stopping to admire pumpkins, homemade candles, and jars of golden honey displayed beneath colorful tents. Ethan smiled as he watched her excitement. No matter how difficult life became, she still found reasons to be amazed by simple things. That, he often thought, was a kind of wealth no paycheck could measure. A few rows away, Victoria Hayes stepped out of her sedan wearing a baseball cap and a light jacket, blending easily into the weekend crowd. She had told Daniel Mercer she wanted one more ordinary encounter before making any decision. Daniel had objected, reminding her of meetings waiting at headquarters, but Victoria simply replied that balance sheets could wait another day while character could not. She spotted Ethan almost immediately, laughing quietly as Lily insisted on comparing the size of two pumpkins that looked almost identical. Before Victoria could decide whether to approach them, a small paper bag slipped from her hands, sending several apples rolling across the sidewalk. Ethan reacted without hesitation. "Careful," he said warmly as he bent down to gather the fruit before anyone stepped on it. Lily hurried over, as well, collecting the last apple before proudly placing it back into the bag. "Victoria Smaid, it seems I owe both of you another thank you." Lily looked up curiously. "Dad says everybody needs help sometimes." Ethan chuckled. "I have been outvoted." Victoria laughed softly, surprised by how natural the moment felt. "Would you let me repay the favor with coffee and hot chocolate?" Ethan hesitated for only a second before Lily answered first. The hot chocolate sounds amazing. He looked toward his daughter, pretending to surrender. "I guess the decision has been made." They found a quiet outdoor table beneath a large maple tree whose leaves drifted gently onto the brick sidewalk. The cafe smelled of cinnamon, fresh pastries, and roasted coffee beans. For the first time since the day outside Ridgeway Market, Victoria found herself speaking without thinking about business. She listened as Lily described her favorite books, her science class, and her dream of becoming a veterinarian because, as she proudly explained, animals could not tell people what hurt, so someone had to understand them anyway. Victoria's eyes softened. "That is a beautiful reason." Lily smiled before turning toward Ethan. "Dad understands people like that." Ethan lowered his coffee cup, slightly embarrassed. "I just try to pay attention." There was a quiet pause before Lily spoke again, her voice gentle and innocent. "If my mom was still here, I think she would like you." Ethan glanced toward his daughter with quiet surprise, but Lily continued before anyone could answer. She always liked people who made everyone else feel comfortable. Victoria felt something catch deep inside her heart. She had spent years surrounded by polished conversations where every compliment carried an agenda and every relationship came with conditions. Yet here sat a little girl offering acceptance with complete sincerity. Victoria reached across the table and gently squeezed Lily's hand. "Your mother must have been a wonderful woman." Lily nodded with a small smile. "Dad says love never really leaves. It just changes where it lives." Ethan looked away toward the falling leaves, remembering Hannah with silent gratitude. Victoria followed his gaze, realizing that the strongest people she had ever met rarely spoke about their own pain. They simply carried it with quiet grace while making life lighter for everyone around them. As they stood to leave, none of them noticed Daniel Mercer watching discreetly from across the street. He quietly lowered his phone after sending a brief message to the executive office. It contained only one sentence. "She is no longer investigating him. She is beginning to admire him." Monday morning settled over Hayes' global headquarters with a polished efficiency that came from thousands of employees following carefully planned schedules. Elevators rose in perfect rhythm. Coffee cups steamed beside polished conference tables. Financial reports waited inside leather folders stamped with the company logo. Yet beneath the calm surface, an important decision was quietly taking shape. Victoria Hayes entered the executive boardroom earlier than anyone else, carrying only a simple notebook instead of the thick briefing binders her leadership team expected. She paused beside the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Columbus. Cars flowed through the streets below like quiet rivers of purpose, each carrying someone with hopes, worries, and responsibilities invisible to everyone else. For the first time in many years, quarterly earnings no longer occupied the center of her thoughts. Instead, she kept remembering a little girl who believed heroes needed apples more than they needed money, and a father who never once mentioned the price of his own sacrifices. One by one, senior executives entered the room, greeting each other with polished smiles and confident handshakes. At the far end of the table sat Richard Collins, Regional Operations Director, the very executive responsible for approving Ridgeway Market's disciplinary actions. He believed this meeting would celebrate another profitable quarter. Instead, Victoria calmly opened her notebook. "Before we discuss financial performance," she began, "I want to discuss leadership." Several executives exchanged curious glances. Richard smiled politely, assuming another conversation about customer satisfaction metrics. Victoria continued, "A company does not reveal its values when everything goes well. It reveals them when ordinary employees face extraordinary choices." The room grew noticeably quieter. Daniel Mercer dimmed the lights and projected several internal reports onto the large screen. Customer satisfaction, employee retention, public trust surveys. Then came a final slide showing only one sentence. "Character is the culture no policy can replace." Richard leaned forward. "An inspiring message, Victoria, but I assume there is more." She looked directly at him without changing her calm expression. "There is." Meanwhile, across town, Ethan Brooks finished another unsuccessful interview at a home improvement store. The hiring manager had been kind but honest. They had selected another candidate with recent retail management experience. Ethan thanked him sincerely before walking back toward his truck. As he reached the parking lot, his phone vibrated. The caller identification displayed an unfamiliar number. "Hello, this is Ethan Brooks." "Good afternoon, Mr. Brooks," a professional voice replied. "My name is Daniel Mercer from Hayes Global. We would like to invite you to visit our headquarters this Wednesday afternoon regarding an employment opportunity." Ethan stopped walking. "I think you may have the wrong person." Daniel smiled quietly on the other end of the line. "No, sir. We're looking for exactly the right person." Ethan hesitated. "I have never applied to Hayes Global." "That is true," Daniel answered. "Sometimes the best candidates are discovered before they submit an application." Ethan looked across the parking lot where autumn leaves drifted slowly around his old pickup truck. Nothing about the call made sense. "May I ask what position this concerns?" Daniel paused for only a moment. That conversation is best held in person. After thanking him, Ethan ended the call and remained standing in thoughtful silence. At almost the same moment, inside the executive boardroom, Richard Collins confidently assured everyone that difficult personnel decisions occasionally had to be made for operational efficiency. Victoria listened without interrupting. She simply closed her notebook, folded her hands together, and spoke with remarkable calm. On Wednesday afternoon, I would like every member of this executive team present in this room. There is one employee decision we are going to review together. No one questioned her request. No one realized that the quiet man driving home in a 12-year-old pickup truck had already begun changing the future of an entire company. And he still had no idea that the woman who had shared hot chocolate with his daughter was preparing to reveal a truth that would leave an entire boardroom sitting in complete silence. Wednesday afternoon arrived beneath a sky washed clean by early autumn rain, and Ethan Brooks parked his aging pickup truck between rows of polished luxury vehicles outside Hayes Global Headquarters. The towering glass building reflected the clouds above like a mirror, making him feel even smaller as he straightened his borrowed navy blazer before stepping inside. The marble lobby gleamed beneath warm lights, and the quiet hum of conversations echoed through the spacious atrium where employees moved with calm confidence. Ethan approached the reception desk with the invitation folded neatly in his pocket. "Good afternoon," he said politely. "My name is Ethan Brooks. I was asked to meet with Mr. Daniel Mercer." The receptionist smiled warmly after checking the schedule. "We have been expecting you, Mr. Brooks." Those simple words surprised him more than he cared to admit. Moments later, Daniel appeared from a nearby hallway, extending his hand with genuine respect rather than corporate formality. "Thank you for coming." Ethan returned the handshake. "I'm still not entirely sure why I am here." Daniel smiled gently. "You will understand very soon." Together they walked through quiet corridors lined with photographs celebrating decades of company history, community service, and employee achievements. Ethan noticed pictures of volunteers rebuilding homes, mentoring students, and serving meals at shelters. It reminded him that businesses at their best could become part of something larger than profit alone. They stopped outside an impressive set of walnut doors leading into the executive boardroom. Daniel looked at him calmly. "Before we go inside, I want you to know that you are not here because anyone feels sorry for you." Ethan nodded slowly. "I never asked anyone to." Daniel's expression softened. "We know." Inside the boardroom, nearly every senior executive had already taken a seat around the long conference table. Richard Collins adjusted his expensive watch while quietly reviewing financial reports, convinced the afternoon would conclude with another discussion about expansion plans. Several department heads glanced toward the door when Ethan entered, immediately assuming he was a job applicant invited to speak about customer service. No one recognized him from the surveillance footage they had not yet seen. Ethan quietly accepted the chair Daniel offered near the end of the table. He folded his hands together and waited patiently, never asking questions that could be answered with time. Then the room became still. The side door opened, and Victoria Hayes entered wearing a tailored charcoal business suit, her calm confidence transforming the atmosphere before she spoke a single word. Ethan looked up, and for a brief second, he simply stared in disbelief. The woman who had shared coffee with him. The woman whose rocking chair he had repaired. The woman Lily had spoken to with such innocent affection. She was standing at the head of the boardroom as every executive immediately rose to their feet. Richard Collins smiled respectfully. "Good afternoon, Madam Chief Executive Officer." Ethan felt the words settle over him like complete silence. Chief Executive Officer. He finally understood. Victoria met his eyes for only a moment before addressing the room. "Please be seated." Every chair moved almost in unison. She remained standing beside the presentation screen, her voice steady and composed. "Today we are not reviewing quarterly profits. Today we are reviewing the true value of leadership." Richard straightened confidently. "I look forward to the discussion." Victoria gave a small nod toward Daniel. Without a word, the lights dimmed, and the first frame of security footage appeared on the screen. Behind her, Ethan immediately recognized the entrance of Ridgeway Market. Richard's confident smile faded ever so slightly as he realized exactly which day the recording would reveal, while Ethan sat quietly, unaware that the ordinary decision he had made in a grocery store parking lot was only seconds away from changing every career, every reputation, and perhaps every future inside that room. The boardroom remained perfectly still as the security footage began to play across the enormous screen. No background music filled the silence. No one reached for a notebook. The only sound was the quiet hum of the projector and the faint rustle of expensive suits as executives shifted uneasily in their chairs. Every eye followed the recording. There was Victoria collapsing near the shopping carts. There were customers stopping for only a moment before continuing with their errands. There was the store manager waving impatiently toward the checkout lanes instead of the parking lot. Then Ethan appeared. He did not look around for permission. He did not ask whose responsibility it was. He simply ran toward a stranger who needed help. The recording showed him placing his jacket beneath Victoria's head, calmly speaking with emergency responders, reassuring frightened customers, and remaining beside her until the ambulance departed. Only then did another clip appear. The manager stood with folded arms while Ethan listened quietly. Even without audio, everyone in the room could recognize the final gesture toward the exit. Ethan accepted his termination with nothing more than a respectful nod before walking away, carrying only his grocery bag. The screen faded to black. No one spoke. Richard Collins lowered his eyes toward the polished conference table, no longer interested in the financial reports sitting unopened before him. Victoria allowed the silence to settle naturally before speaking. This company often celebrates employees who increase profits. Today I want to recognize a man who protected something even more valuable. She turned toward Ethan. Mr. Brooks, when you chose to help me that afternoon, did you know who I was? Ethan answered honestly. No, ma'am. Did you expect any reward? No. Did you know helping me would cost your job? Ethan paused briefly before giving the only answer that matched the man he had always been. I knew someone needed help. Everything else came afterward. Another silence filled the room, heavier than the first. Victoria looked around the table. That answer is the culture we have been trying to write into policy manuals for years. She faced Richard Collins with calm dignity rather than anger. Leadership is not measured by how efficiently we protect procedures. Leadership is measured by whether good people are still allowed to do the right thing. Richard slowly stood. His voice lacked the confidence it had carried only minutes earlier. Madam Chief Executive Officer, I approve the termination based solely on policy compliance. I never reviewed the circumstances personally. Victoria nadie diente. That is precisely the problem. She was not interested in humiliation. She was interested in accountability. Policies should support human judgment, not replace it. Richard lowered his head. You are right. No one defended the decision. No one offered excuses. Daniel Mercer quietly placed a folder before Victoria. She opened it and smiled toward Ethan. Mr. Brooks, Hayes Global needs leaders who teach character before they teach procedures. If you're willing, I would like to offer you the position of Director of Employee Culture and Community Values. You will report directly to my office. Your responsibility will not be to increase quarterly profits. Your responsibility will be to help ensure that no employee ever has to choose between keeping a job and doing what is right. Ethan looked genuinely overwhelmed. I have never held a position like that. Victoria's smile became warmer. Exactly. You have lived it. She slid the employment agreement across the table, but made no attempt to rush him. Take all the time you need. The title matters far less than the example you have already given us. Ethan looked from the offer to the executives sitting silently around the room. Weeks earlier, he had walked out of a grocery store believing kindness had ended his career. Now he realized something remarkable. Sometimes quiet dignity travels farther than any resume ever could, and when truth finally reaches the right room, even the most powerful people discover that respect begins by standing for the one person who never asked for recognition. 1 year later, the first light of an October morning spread gently across Columbus as Ethan Brooks stood outside Hayes Global headquarters, not because he had forgotten where he came from, but because he never wanted success to erase the man he had always been. His pickup truck was still the same 12-year-old truck, freshly washed every Saturday by two determined hands and one enthusiastic little helper. Lily insisted it was lucky, and Ethan had long ago stopped arguing with her. Inside the company, framed photographs now lined an entire hallway, not celebrating record profits or market expansion, but ordinary employees helping strangers, supporting coworkers, volunteering in schools, and choosing compassion when no one expected it. Every new employee attended Ethan's orientation before learning anything about company procedures. He never began with policies. He always began with one simple sentence. People remember how we made them feel long after they forget what we sold them. Those words slowly became part of the company's culture. Employee retention improved. Customer trust reached record levels. Yet whenever reporters asked Ethan about his accomplishments, he always smiled and redirected the attention toward the thousands of employees quietly choosing kindness every day. On a bright Saturday afternoon, Lily raced through a peaceful neighborhood park carrying a small bouquet of wildflowers she had picked with careful permission from the community garden nearby. Victoria Hayes sat on a wooden bench beneath a tall maple tree, gently holding the tiny baby boy sleeping peacefully in her arms. Motherhood had changed something inside her that even the largest boardroom victories never could. She no longer measured every day by decisions made. Sometimes she measured them by moments remembered. Lily carefully approached the bench and looked down at the sleeping baby with wide eyes full of wonder. "He smiles even when he is dreaming," she whispered. Victoria laughed softly. Maybe he is dreaming about meeting his big sister. Lily's face brightened. She looked toward Ethan, who had just finished unpacking a picnic basket onto a nearby blanket. "Did you hear that?" she called happily. She said, "Big sister." Ethan looked at Victoria. Their eyes met with the quiet understanding that only grows when respect comes before affection and friendship comes before love. Neither of them rushed to define what life had become. They simply allowed gratitude to lead where fear once had. Victoria gently placed the baby into Ethan's waiting arms. He looked down at the little boy sleeping peacefully against his chest, and for just a moment the entire world seemed to become wonderfully quiet. Years earlier, he had carried a stranger because it was the right thing to do. Today he held a child surrounded by a family built not through wealth or coincidence, but through trust earned one ordinary choice at a time. Nearby, Lily reached in her backpack and carefully removed the faded photograph of Hannah that Ethan always kept safely tucked inside a protective sleeve. She smiled at the picture before placing it beside a small autumn flower beneath the maple tree. "Thank you," she whispered. "Dad kept his promise. We are happy." Ethan looked toward the gentle breeze moving through the golden leaves above them, remembering every difficult day that had once seemed impossible to survive. Losing a job had felt like the end of his future. Instead, it had quietly become the doorway to a life he never imagined. Money had provided comfort. Success had provided opportunity. But neither of those gifts compared to the simple blessing of being surrounded by people who valued character before status and kindness before convenience. As the afternoon sunlight settled softly across the park, laughter replaced worry, hope replaced fear, and the silence that followed was no longer the silence of uncertainty. It was the peaceful silence that arrives when truth has finally found its home, proving once again that the greatest miracles often begin with one quiet decision to help someone who can offer nothing in return.